Welcome to This Explainer. If you look back at human history, you're basically looking at a massive graveyard of utopian ideas. And why did they fail? Mostly because they tried to skip straight to the finish line without an actual map. Well, today, we're looking at something incredibly ambitious. It is literally a technical specification for rebuilding society. Imagine taking all those grand abstract philosophies about how to live and govern and turning them into a precise step-by-step order of operations. So for the next few minutes, think of me as your calm but slightly urgent architect. We aren't just tossing around abstract ideas here. We are examining a concrete dependency chain designed to reduce unnecessary suffering and basically design a better civilization right from the ground up. So here's the 6-part blueprint we're going to explore today. First, the dependency chain. Second, building the foundation. Third, prototyping the future. Fourth, the institutional sequence. Fifth, global export and governance. And finally, number 6, the iteration loop. Remember, these aren't just isolated ideas you can pick and choose from like a buffet. They are a rigidly engineered step-by-step sequence. All right, let's dive into part 1, the dependency chain, with epistemology acting as our infrastructure. Now, epistemology, which is basically just how we know what we know, is our starting point. Look at the core thesis of this whole blueprint. Power magnifies whatever reaches it. It's that simple. If confusion reaches power, well, it becomes policy confusion. If ego reaches power, it becomes institutional ego. So the warning here is pretty stark. Phase 1 of this blueprint absolutely must start with the self. People don't just magically leave their deep-seated need for validation or their chronic lack of sleep at the door when they take public office, right? You have to regulate your physical body first. You've got to protect your sleep, practice emotional regulation, and really get right with yourself before you ever think about launching a public campaign, because otherwise, exhausted people are just going to make exhausted decisions. Moving right along to section 2, building the foundation through self, text, and community. Zooming in on this foundation, we see a logical progression that you literally cannot skip. Step 1 is that regulated body we just talked about. A calm nervous system actually makes step 2 possible, which is the deep reading and interrogation of a shared text. That shared text then becomes the bedrock for step 3, building a private community culture where people actually learn how to disagree without immediately getting defensive and protecting their egos. And only after that culture is stable do we move to step 4, which is launching public emotional media. You have to make the future emotionally intelligible to the wider public, for sure, but only after your own house is totally in order. Let's look a little closer at that text step, because there's a crucial distinction here. The goal isn't just memorization, it is internalization. Memorization is super fragile. It's like, parroting catchy slogans you read online just to perform certainty. The second someone pokes a hole in your argument, you freeze up. But internalization? That means you can rebuild the argument from scratch when someone challenges you. You understand the deep architecture of the ideas, not just the buzzwords. And because of that, you can honestly admit when you are uncertain and actually survive public scrutiny without completely crumbling. As this movement steps out into the public eye with its art and media, it is absolutely going to attract distortion. That's a given. Now, while beautiful art builds the public's desire for a better future, the community behind the scenes has to be trained in what the blueprint calls bad philosophy literacy. They really need to recognize manufactured outrage and aestheticized cruelty. Basically, that's when people use slick production or clever editing to make sheer meanness look cool or intellectual. You've got to be able to spot these bad faith arguments from a mile away if you want to defend your vision from rhetorical decay. Okay, on to section 3, prototyping the future, testing before scaling. Now we take things from theory straight into the laboratory. Before anyone goes out demanding sweeping national governance changes, you've got to test the mechanisms on a small scale. You have to watch what breaks. Actually, scratch that. You want things to break here, in a room of 50 people, not when 1 million citizens are trying to use a system to vote. You have to ask the hard questions. Do your digital tools reward actual preparation, or just whoever yells the loudest? Does your fancy new deliberation platform accidentally exclude people just because the interface design is terrible? Does moderation suddenly turn into unaccountable power? This whole phase is about discovering that messy gap between a perfectly clean theoretical model and lived experience under pressure. Next up, section 4, the institutional sequence, or the architecture of reform. So now we scale up to national institutions, which is phase 6 of the blueprint. The absolute key takeaway here is that institutional reform is not just some random wish list. It's a very carefully stacked, cascading architecture, and it literally has to start with digital deliberative democracy. Take the concept of democracy dollars, for example. It's a simple mechanism that gives citizens public funds to support candidates, totally replacing opaque backroom lobbying with transparent participation. Why start here? Well, if you don't secure the democratic infrastructure first, every single subsequent reform you try to pass is going to be vulnerable to the exact same corrupt access networks that shaped the old system. Once you actually secure that democracy, you trigger this incredible rapid domino effect. Democratic reform unlocks economic restructuring, like universal basic income, for instance, to remove that daily grinding precarity. And that economic security? That allows for a reformed media environment, simply because people aren't being driven by survival-induced panic anymore. A healthier information layer that allows the public to actually trust the state with healthcare. Good healthcare creates a physical and mental baseline you need for successful education. Better education prevents harm, making compassionate justice and rehabilitation politically viable. Then you remove bureaucratic friction so people can actually access those rights easily. And finally, with immense trust and capacity built up, society can tackle massive environmental design. It is a chain reaction. You cannot skip steps.
All right, Section 5, Global Export in Governance, Building the Coordination Layer. Zooming out to the global scale for a second. Once a country actually has domestic results, like working prototypes and honest outcome data, it shouldn't just go around exporting its ideology. It absolutely needs to export its methods. The blueprint proposes something called an Institute of Collaboration. Now, this isn't some bloated, massive world government. It's a treaty-backed network of highly focused centers. Think of, say, a climate adaptation center publishing open-source infrastructure designs. It replaces those purely symbolic diplomatic photo ops with real, concrete civic exchanges. Picture a prison officer from one country studying Norwegian rehabilitation methods and coming back with a concrete, actionable manual. That's a real game changer. With that kind of international coordination actively working, we have to govern emerging technologies before bad defaults harden into permanent infrastructure. And listen, the windows to do this are closing rapidly. In the near term, we're facing agentic AI. These are systems that don't just write text, they autonomously take actions and spend real money. We need strict audit trails for that right now. In the midterm, post-quantum cryptography is a massive priority. We have to prevent hackers from stealing encrypted data today just so they can decrypt it tomorrow when they have stronger computers. And long-term, we absolutely must manage biosecurity and AI-assisted biology. Being early to regulate this stuff might cost money, but being late, that costs secrets, and way more importantly, it costs safety.
Finally, Section 6, the iteration loop, refining the system.
So as this blueprint meets reality, things are going to break. That's just a fact of life. But there is a massive difference in how we can handle it. Failing projects usually rely on something called defensive revision. It's kind of like doubling down on a terrible GPS route just because you were the one who originally suggested it. It's all about protecting the ego and the identity of the creators. But successful civilizational design, that uses honest iteration. It enthusiastically accepts better evidence without ever treating refinement as a defeat. The destination, which is the deliberate reduction of suffering, stays exactly the same, but the path to get there has to remain incredibly adaptable.
Let's ground this massive global scale back down to the everyday. The blueprint reminds us that AI is currently compressing timescales, which makes careful acceleration actually possible. Reforms that once took generations might now move in mere years. But the real measure of success isn't about completing some entire utopian project by tomorrow. Not at all. The measure is simply this. Does the next person in line inherit a system, a tool, or a community that is clearer, kinder, and easier to use than the one you inherited?
I really want to highlight this quote because I think it takes a lot of the pressure off. It relieves you of the burden of feeling like you have to fix everything yourself. The task is not to perform ownership of the entire project. You are just one responsible participant in a long sequence operating during a specific window of time. You just need to find your specific place in the dependency chain. That's the whole shebang. So, I'm gonna leave you with this question to chew on. Whether it's self-regulation, building a private community, writing, prototyping a democratic tool, or working on environmental design, look at the blueprint in front of you. Which phase is active around you right now? Which phase needs you? Start small, build that foundation today, and leave the next person more prepared than you were. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Catch you next time.